right. Hello and welcome to our fourth Pilot Grants Program Seminar Series. I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Alicia Mousseau, who will be giving our presentation today. Dr. Mousseau is an enrolled member of the Oglala Sioux Tribe and a resident of the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. She's a member of the Oglala Sioux Tribe Research Review Board and is a research instructor for the Centers of American Indian and Alaska Native Health in the Colorado School of Public Health at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. Dr. Mousseau is currently the director of Tuahe Gluwashkapi Project, which is a family-based substance use prevention program for 10 to 14-year-old Lakota youth and their families based on Strengthening Families and Substance Abuse Prevention Program. Focuses on examining so her other work focuses on examining self-regulation, affect, and substance use among American Indian youth, including examining mindfulness techniques to reduce risky behaviors, which is the work she's going to be presenting for us today. So Dr. Mousseau is dedicated to promoting prevention and health equity in American Indian communities throughout research and capacity building. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Alicia Mousseau.
So thank you, Danielle, for that introduction. Like Danielle said, my name is Alicia Mousseau. My parents are John and Vera Mousseau, and my grandparents are Lena and James Mousseau. And I'm from Porcupine, and my Hunka parents are Karen Spoonhunter Brown and Howard Brown. And they're from Arapahoe, Wyoming. So today I'll be presenting on my pilot project that was granted through CRCAIH, and we'll be talking about the mindfulness program that we implemented. There's a camera and she's trying to walk in front of it, sorry. So I'll be talking about the I thought he was waving at me, but he was like, stop. So today I'll be presenting on the mindfulness program that we implemented in a school with American Indian youth, and we'll be talking about the lessons learned and future directions in capacity building. So without further ado, the impetus or the reasons for this project were many. It was kind of like a perfect storm type of thing. Unfortunately, one of the perfect storm types of things is that our Indian youth are facing a lot of challenges. And so these are some news clippings and different websites and different programs that are going on to help our American Indian youth kind of tackle some of these challenges that they're facing. And so after I finished grad school, I wanted to return home. Postdocs are always there, but I wanted to return home because there's a lot of lessons to learn from working in communities, doing CBPR, true CBPR, and I felt like returning home at that point, I would learn a lot more than going to a postdoc. So I returned home without a job, with some high hopes, and I knew that returning home, I had worked at home before. I had gone to graduate school. I had done diabetes prevention and youth mentoring. So I had connections at home, and I knew people, and I knew that my community knew where I was for those 5 years, and they knew I would be coming back, and I knew they would utilize me in some sort of capacity. So I returned home, and I started doing some consulting work and working with different organizations. And then I started to work at Indian Health Service for a little bit. And so I was at Indian Health Service, and that was great, and I enjoyed my colleagues, and I enjoyed working there, but it wasn't my passion. My passion is research. My passion is prevention. I feel like I can reach a lot more people with research and prevent some of those things that you would normally see when you're working at a medical facility or IHS. So I decided to go full-time consulting, and so I left IHS and I started, and the pilot grant came out at that time. So the perfect storm was starting to brew, and I decided to work on writing this for one of the places I was consulting for. And so through the Native Children's Research Exchange Program, the Scholars Program, Dr. Nancy Whitesell and Dr. Michelle Sarche, they helped me write the grants and helped me, they gave me models and things to work off of to write for the pilot grant, to implement a program to help our youth. So what program do we use, right? Like, there's so many things going on. So what program do we use? And I was turned on to mindfulness through my clinical work. I'm a clinical psychologist by training. So I learned about mindfulness through acceptance and commitment therapy, which is third wave therapy. And when I first heard about mindfulness, I thought it was a little hokey, right? Like it felt a little, and no offense, a little hippie to me. And so I thought, but as a good therapist that I tried to be, I was trying it out myself. So I started to try out mindfulness on my own, see what it was about, so I could convey that to my clients and people I worked with. So I started to utilize mindfulness and practice it, and it made a lot of sense to me. Like it's third wave, but it was very basic, and it was a tool and a skill that you could utilize in a lot of different situations. So mindfulness is non-judgmental present moment awareness, and what that means is that you're present in the moment, and we're human beings, so we have thoughts, we have feelings, we have things going on in our daily lives, and instead of trying to avoid or over engaging with those things and getting consumed by them, you're just present with them. You're aware of them. You're not judging them. You're not taking it in and internalizing anything. You're just present with it. And that makes a lot of sense. And it seems very easy, but it's very hard because we are, the human nature in us tries to engage or disengage and get away from those feelings or those thoughts. But mindfulness just helps you be present. So in my experience with mindfulness and teaching it to clients and therapeutic clients, I thought this is a great tool for our youth to utilize because it's mobile. You can use it anywhere. Your breath is always present. You can always find your breath and bring you back to the present moment. And it's at that point it was sort of blowing up, but it's definitely blown up since that point. And now mindfulness is being studied in schools, so it's been shown to have positive impacts on cognitive, social, and psychological development, including working memory, attention, academic skills, social skills, emotion regulation, and self-esteem. It also been associated with self-reported improvements in mood and reductions in anxiety and stress and fatigue. And there's also been treatment efficacy reviews. Black, Malam, and Sussman found sitting meditation interventions among youth, so it's been specific among youth as a treatment efficacy review, to be effective in reducing anxiety, social behavioral problems, including absenteeism, rule infractions, externalizing problems, attentional problems, self-esteem, and suspension days. So it sounds great, right? Like it's all these things going on, but mindfulness by no means is a panacea for anything. It can help a lot of things if done correctly, if practiced regularly, and I think those are some of the things we'll talk about later, but there's always that caveat of it's not a panacea, but it can definitely help a lot of things. So let's try it out, right? It's a pilot project. Let's try it out and see if it actually helps our American Indian youth. Considering that mindfulness felt like a pretty good fit in that a lot of our practices are very intentional, very focused, it's, very present. So a lot of traditional practices have a feel of mindfulness to them. So felt like a good fit, so let's try it out. But like I mentioned earlier, there's some of those problems that our American Indian youth are facing. So what do we focus on? So some of the things that we wanted to focus on, some of my areas of research are substance use. And substance use is one of the most prevalent. It's very prevalent in American Indian populations compared to other ethnic populations in the United States, including youth and adults. Also, American Indian youth report higher frequency and quantity, especially reservation-dwelling American Indian youth. And American Indian youth are also more likely to start using alcohol and marijuana at earlier ages, and earlier substance use has been shown to have later abuse and related problems to substances. So, and then finally, the morbidity of it all is that American Indians have 524% greater alcohol and drug-related deaths are 1.5 times greater in comparison to other races in America. So the actual outcomes of substance use, there's high morbidity associated with them. So trying to increase our life expectancy, looking at substance use, and seeing if mindfulness had an effect on substance use of our youth. The next risky behavior we wanted to look at was sexual risk, for similar reasons in that STIs account for 85% of the most prevalent infectious diseases in the United States, with adolescents and young adults between the ages of 10 to 24 being at highest risk and accounting for nearly half of all new STIs. So this population has a lot of STI, and they're the most prevalent. In the state where my study was conducted, the CDC did a report, and there was a 61% increase in gonorrhea and 21% increase in chlamydia over the past 5 years. So those rates are getting higher as we speak. And American Indians in the state where the study was conducted represent some of the highest percentages of these cases, including 82% of gonorrhea cases in this population as well, 15 to 24 years old, having the highest rates in any other group. So, and also, finally, the county where the study was conducted has the second highest rates of STIs in the nation. So, for these reasons, we wanted to look at sexual risk and the effects of mindfulness on these different areas. Finally, aside from risk factors, we also wanted to look at some academic factors since it is a school-based program. So we wanted to look at retention, as retention is a part of academic success. You have to show up to school to be successful. So we wanted to look at attendance rates, and at the school where this was conducted, the daily attendance rate was 81%, so out of 350 students, 280 students reported on a daily basis. However, at the end of the year, that population of 350 students dropped by 100 students to 250. And then we only had a 70% daily attendance rate by the end, with 200 students showing up daily. Finally, out of 150 freshmen entering into this high school, only 35 were likely to finish as seniors. So we had a 35% retention rate. So 150 students either dropped out, transferred, went somewhere else, but they were not at this school. And I feel like this is very similar to other schools, American Indian schools, and it's definitely an issue that needs to be looked at, and maybe a whole separate pilot project in itself. So we wanted to see if mindfulness helped our students with the academic piece as well, and specifically the retention piece. So what about mindfulness and risky behaviors? So I talked a little about mindfulness earlier, about the positive influences, but specifically with risky behaviors, greater mindfulness attention has been associated with adults' perception of better physical and psychological functioning. So they feel, people who have higher mindfulness feel like they're physically better and functioning better psychologically. It also has been negatively correlated with risky sexual behaviors, so less risky sexual behaviors with those who are have more mindful awareness. And finally, mindful awareness and attention have been particularly useful in reducing emotional reactivity and impulsive behaviors. And impulsive behaviors usually leads to risky behaviors. From doing something impulsive, I may go out and binge drink, or engage in some risky sexual behaviors. So impulsivity is correlated with the risky behaviors, but mindfulness has been shown to reduce that. So the theory behind all of this and how mindfulness influences all these risky behaviors and other impulsive behaviors is the emotion regulation and distress tolerance model. Can you guys see that okay? Okay. Sometimes when you put larger diagrams, it's really hard to see, so I just want to check. So we talked about the stresses and the things that our youth are facing, our American Indian youth specifically. So there's a stress, right? There's something that goes on at school, at home, in the community, in their personal lives, something that triggers them as stressful. So at one end of the continuum, these students can disengage. They can avoid the situation, avoid avoid by self-harm, avoid by substance use, try to get away from the situation mentally and sometimes physically. That can lead to maladaptive cognitive behaviors and intolerance for emotional distress. So, I don't think I can handle these situations, so I'm going to start using substances, and that becomes a pattern. So when something difficult comes up, I'm going to start using substances, or I'm going to engage in other risky behaviors so I can avoid the situation. That becomes my thought pattern when something difficult comes up. So I have these maladaptive thoughts and behaviors as a result. And that causes dysregulation emotions and thoughts and everything else. On the other end, you can overengage. So something stressful comes up, our youth overengage, they become hypervigilant, develop these thought patterns associated with trying to protect themselves, being untrustworthy. So the more negative cognitive patterns and behaviors of avoiding, isolating, things like that, and that also leads to dysregulation. So you have these ends of the spectrum, but mindfulness has been, this is a theory, is that it's kind of a middle of the road. It helps if youth engage mindfully with the situation, with their emotions, whether they're good or bad. Some stressful situations can be good, right? Like having a kid or entering a school. So those can be some good stressful situations, but the way we respond to them influences how we engage with the situation and how we later cope. So if you're able to tolerate the positive and negative affect that's associated with these stressful situations and kind of feel them, and I mentioned how mindfulness is present moment awareness, so you're aware of the feelings you're having, the thoughts you're having associated with the stressful situation, you're able to be present with them, engage with them, but not overly engage or under-engage, then you become less reactive to stressful triggers because you know that, things in life are going to happen. And you know that you can handle the situation. You don't have to necessarily engage with those emotions or avoid those emotions. You can feel the emotions. You can see your thoughts. It's the nature of being human is to have emotions and thoughts. So being able to be aware of that and not judge those feelings and thoughts and just have them, they're scary. Feelings are scary when they happen, and we try to avoid them. But if you're able to just understand that we do have emotions, and I talk a lot about emotions. When I was in graduate school, one of my supervisors told me, you don't talk about emotions enough, and I was like, oh, I don't. So I started to try it out more and take that constructive criticism, and now I can't stop talking about emotions. So so stop me if I go on too long. But being able to just have emotions, feel them, and be present with them is a challenge. But if you do it, you can learn to handle situations and handle those feelings and know they're going to come and know they're going to go. And that leads to regulation. We're not overly or under engaged. We're present, we're with it, and we feel it, and that leads to more emotional balance and perceived effective self-efficacy. So I feel like I can handle the affect that happens to me, different emotions that happen to me. I have a more positive mood with less distress. I don't ruminate as much, so I don't think about the negative things or think about how horrible things are, or that thought pattern isn't running constantly in my mind throughout all activities. That means that I'm able to improve my intention, so I'm able to be present. I'm not thinking, this is scary, or I hate talking in front of people. That's not running through my mind. I'm able to be here with you guys and talk to you guys and get your attention and give you my attention. It also improves executive functioning, which is a whole span of things, but executive functioning is what we want. So it improves executive functioning. We also have enhanced academic performance because I'm able to be present in class. I'm not bringing what I brought from home with me into the classroom. I'm able to separate that and deal with that when it happens. And if those feelings come later, I can deal with those feelings and then move on to the next thing. So I'm able to be present in the classroom. And behavioral control. So we're able to have better behavioral control. So those impulsive behaviors we were talking about earlier, I can regulate them. I don't have to engage with them. I don't have to resort to that to reduce some of my distress. And finally, improved health and well-being. So kind of the overall just being able to be healthy and present and have better well-being. So this is the model that was guiding us, and furthermore, mindfulness and emotional regulation has been associated with reduced emotional regulation difficulties in correlational research. So not as strong, but Black and colleagues found, so in association with risky behaviors, and looking at this emotion regulation theory, Black and colleagues found the influence of mindfulness on 30-day smoking among Chinese adolescents to be mediated by depressive and anger, affect, and perceived stress. So mindfulness was associated with better affective regulation, which then led to reduced smoking. A lot of youth use smoking as a stress reliever, but if you have mindfulness, then that's you don't necessarily need the smoking. So it reduced the smoking, 30-day smoking frequency. And then finally, Roberts and Danoff-Berg found the relationship of mindfulness to be related to perceived health was mediated by stress. So including healthy behaviors of sleeping quality, binge eating, and physical activity, those youth who had more mindfulness had less stress and were able to deal with physical things, including sleeping better, not eating, not engaging in binge eating because they weren't stressed. We tend to stress eat sometimes. But if you have more mindfulness and aware of those emotions and what you're going through, you're less stressed and you're less likely to engage in some of those negative physical health behaviors. So all that literature led us to the specific aims. And one is just to pilot the mindfulness curriculum among American Indian youth and students to determine feasibility, refine details, and maximize fit within the community. And if I don't know if I knew Kathy Etz that well at that time, but Kathy Etz has been a great mentor, and she would say that is not a specific aim. But but we got away, and Kathy Etz worked with NIDA. I don't know if any of you guys have worked with her, but she's great. But we did, but that was one of the biggest learning things that we got out of this is piloting it and seeing if it worked and how it worked and where it fit and how we can make it better. So that was our first specific aim. Our second one was to examine the effects of the mindfulness curriculum on risky behaviors, including substance use and unsafe sexual behaviors. The third was to examine the effects of mindfulness on retention. And the fourth was to gather data and prepare for a randomized control trial of a mindfulness curriculum with other American Indian youth at different schools. So some notes before I continue on. The school adopted the mindfulness curriculum in the beginning. So I had written this before the school year had started. And they thought it was a great idea to just make it a part of the health and PE class. So we were originally just going to implement it with freshmen, but they wanted to implement it in the health and PE class, so we opened it up to all of the health and PE students, including the alternative students, because our alternative schools, those students are put in a different classroom. They're for different reasons, some learning reasons, some behavioral reasons, so they're put in a different classroom, and they are guided by computers, so they're computer taught, and there's a teacher there to facilitate, but a lot of it is computer taught. So they're not necessarily they don't have all the same resources as the other kids in the school. So they wanted to open up to those alternative students as well to give them an opportunity to engage in the mindfulness curriculum and receive it. So we opened it up to all health and PE students and alternative students as well. The second note is that the attendance software used at the school was inaccurate. This was a big bummer, and it kind of blew my mind, but but due to the inability to accurately get attendance records from this database, and I went through it with counselors at the school. We tried to, because you have tardies that add up to absentee days, and then you also have excused and unexcused absences, and this database is supposed to track all of that. However, when we'd sit down and try to say, okay, this kid has this many tardies on record, and this many excused days, and try to make the numbers match, they never matched, unfortunately. So hopefully schools get a better attendance record, because that was, it was, I don't know how that happens, especially if it's a database, but it happened. So we weren't able to actually examine specific aim 3. So if anybody out there is doing attendance with schools, make sure you track attendance in a different way rather than utilizing a database if you're not sure if that, or make sure that database is accurate first. So word of wise. So moving on, trying to figure out what mindfulness curriculum to use, we decided on Learning to Breathe. It is a curriculum for adolescents, and it was developed in 2012, or it was published in 2012 by Patricia Broderick. Super awesome lady, came out, trained. She's very responsive too. If you need any help emailing her, she was great. She was great help with the project. And I really liked this curriculum because it broke it down to an acronym, which makes it easier for youth to remember and facilitators to remember. And it goes over every piece of mindfulness, and you teach it in different skills. There's different activities associated with it. There's also sitting time. But it breaks it down and goes over every piece of mindfulness, which B is for the body. So you start with some body scans, teaching youth that you can learn things through paying attention to your body. If I'm upset, I can feel it somewhere in my body. If I'm stressed, I can feel it in my body. So starting with your body and basic foundation. Then you move on to the reflections, which is thoughts. So mindfulness of thoughts, knowing that our mind, the nature of the mind is to think, and we have thousands and thousands of thoughts a day, and being able to watch those thoughts and be present with those thoughts, but not necessarily engage or take those thoughts personal or judge those thoughts. So we teach that skill through activities and sitting as well. And then E is for emotions. So similar with thoughts, being able to have emotions and sit with your emotions and see your emotions and feel your emotions and know that your emotions are going to come and they're going to go. I'm not going to cry forever. If anybody's ever sat down and had a really good cry, you end up stopping at some point. You can't continue on even if you want to, right? Like your body just can't. So understanding that piece of like emotions come and they'll go and they're not going to be there forever. And A is awareness. So being aware. Being present, practicing being present, bringing aware. So more practice of those other things as well. T is for tenderness, and tenderness is usually explained as loving kindness in mindfulness words. So loving kindness, practicing loving kindness, and this piece is really super interesting, whereas the other pieces you're kind of just aware and present. Tenderness and loving kindness is more of like sending, I don't want to say positive affirmations, but you're just kind of giving, compassion to yourself and to other people. So allowing yourself to be, and giving yourself, positive reinforcement through, may I be strong, may I be peaceful, may I be balanced, may I be happy, and extending that out to other people as well. So, creating a kindness atmosphere with yourself and with other people so you can engage with other people kindly. And a lot of people like that one too. I really like that one. H is habits, just continuing to build a habit. Mindfulness you have to practice on the daily, and we had daily, a part of the curriculum is daily practices, and you give different reminders to students, and there's a workbook that goes with it, and there's audio that goes with it. There's a lot of components to it to build that habit of mindfulness, to build that that practice and utilize that skill so that if you have that tool, you develop that skill so when you go to your toolbox, it's ready to use and you know how to use it. Finally, the main goal of Learning to Breathe, or L2B, is empowerment. So empowering me to handle situations, empowering our youth to handle situations, giving them that tool for their toolbox and letting them practice that tool in difficult situations on their own, giving them the skills to do that. So that was Learning to Breathe, and it's 7 sessions, and the E and the H can be combined, so it can be 7 to 8. But, 2, 4, 7, excuse me. So it's 7 sessions, and it can be weekly, and it can be bi-weekly, or twice a week, excuse me. So we implemented that mindfulness curriculum with our students. The method was a weightless control design. We didn't want to not offer it to students, so we decided to do a weightless control design, where half of the PE students, health and PE students, got it the first semester, and the other half got it the second semester. There's a pre-post survey with a total of 3 survey points. And these are our measures that we utilized. The 5-facet mindfulness questionnaire, which you can see the reliabilities on the side as well. We used the mindfulness awareness attentional scale for adolescents and the awareness of connectedness scale. And those 3 are different mindfulness scales that we utilize. And we utilize 3 scales because this hasn't been done in this population. So we wanted to see what scale fit. And also I'm kind of glad we did that because some scales matched, with other things and other scales didn't. They were all 3 correlated to each other. However, with other emotion regulation, some were more related than others. So I'm glad we utilized those 3 different mindfulness scales, but that's why we did that. And then we looked at difficulties in emotion regulation, because if we looked at that emotion regulation model, that's a mediating piece. It can be. Self-control is also another emotion regulation piece we wanted to look at. Perceived stress, that's also been used, and a lot of these have been used in the literature previously with youth. So we looked at perceived stress, and then we also wanted to look at post-traumatic stress disorder checklists, which is the PCLC, and the screen for child anxiety-related disorders, or the SCARED, so anxiety and PTSD, so some of those anxiety measures. So our participants, this is what our participants look like. We had 87 participants, and some did not choose to assent. Some of our participants didn't assent. Also, there's a lot of missing data, as you will see soon. But out of our 87 that we got, there was 46% were freshmen, 19.5% were sophomores, 14.9% juniors, 11.5% seniors, and 17.2% were in alternative school. That makes sense, given our population is higher in our freshman class, and the rest of our classes have lower populations. The age range was 12 to 19, with an average of 15 years old. And the gender, 55.2% were female and 44.8% male. I don't know what the actual percentage of the school, but I know the literature is showing that females are actually being more present in schools than males. So this might be more of our trend of what our distribution looks like for males and females coming up. So, and then 96.6% identified as American Indian or some other race, but American Indian was one of their identities. And 98.9% live on the reservation. I gave them the option of choosing sometimes they live on the reservation, because some of you may know some of our youth are fluid and they go in and out of different places. So I wanted to give them the option. Sometimes they may live on the reservation, sometimes they not. So some chose that. So survey completion. For the experimental group, and I know we had a waitlist control design, but we ended up with the experimental and control group. And we'll talk about that. But in our experimental group, we had 39 participants. And in group 1, there was 23, and group 2, there were 16 participants that completed the survey and completed the mindfulness curriculum. And in the control, which we ended up with, there was 48. We ended up with the control because of scheduling. Class schedules change. So, and also, as we saw in the beginning, students attend school. The percentage daily attendance rate. So some may have attended during the survey, some may have not. And finally, the survey completion, time 1 only. We had 44 students complete only time 1, and then time 1 and 2 only, 13 completed time 1 and time 2. Time 1 and 3 only, 7 completed, and finally for all 3 time points, we had 23 students complete time 1, 2, and 3. And like I mentioned, it's a lot of, because of scheduling, with class schedules changing, students, going from having this class at the beginning of the semester and then mid-semester changing classes. And also students' attendance rate had an effect as well. So for correlations, I broke it into our mindfulness measures to show the correlations with different things. Like I mentioned earlier, all of the mindfulness measures were correlated, but the 5-facet mindfulness questionnaire was correlated with the most other self-control, measures. And then the adolescence scale, the MASA, was associated with perceived stress, self-control, and the DERS, so similar to the FFMQ. And then the ACS, which actually is a measure out of Alaska. It's awareness of connectedness scale. It was developed by Mohat and I believe Allen and colleagues, and that was developed to look at connections between people, how they feel connected to themselves, their family, their community, and it was actually done in an Alaska population. So we wanted to utilize that measure just to see how it fit with American Indians, since it was developed in Alaska population. But that was one of the mindfulness measures that wasn't related to as many other emotion regulation measures. So the mediation, we talked about the emotion regulation model earlier. And so this is the mediation that we found. So the 5-facet mindfulness questionnaire was one that was associated with the other anxiety measures, and particularly the PCL and SCARED. And our other emotion regulation measures were actually related to more of the anxiety measures and than our actual mindfulness measures. So that was pretty interesting. But this shows that mindfulness is mediated for post-traumatic stress disorder by perceived stress and self-control. So those who have more mindfulness, and this is actually the baseline data, so our time 1 data, everyone's baseline. So those who have more mindfulness have less perceived stress and more self-control, which then leads to less PTSD symptoms. And finally, the mindfulness goes the bottom mediation there. Mindfulness is mediated by self-control, and which results in less anxiety. So those who have more mindfulness have more self-control and less anxiety symptoms. So sort of validating that model a little bit that we talked about earlier. As far as intervention effects, time 1 to time 2 experimental, we had 7, and control we had 14 in the time 1 to time 2 measures. And I looked at all different times since our numbers were so small. I also learned how to use M+, so trying to figure out the missing data and all of those things. Learned some new statistical skills in the process. But for time 1 to time 2, we had increases in the awareness of connectedness scale, which is one of our mindfulness scales. So we did have a little bit of increase in that scale for mindfulness. We also had less difficulties with emotion regulation, so that's good. Our students were reporting less difficulty regulating their emotions. And the odd one out was we had more, and we used the YRBS for our measures of risky behaviors. We actually had more use of chewing tobacco in our experimental group. But as you can see, our numbers are lopsided, and so we try to figure all those pieces out using statistical analysis. But that one, and that one also might be a part of like a lot of people in that community in the area utilize chewing tobacco. You can see people using it at school, things like that. So it might be more of like a norm type thing, but there's an increase, so I'm not sure what the increase was about, or if it was even directly related to the mindfulness. Time 2 to time 3, we looked at cohort 2 to see if they had any effects from the mindfulness, and we didn't see anything from time 2 to time 3. In time 1 to time 3, so we took all the aggregate, and we looked at, we only had 4 in the experimental and 16 in the control, but those in the both groups had less post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, but the control group actually had more, significantly more decrease in PTSD. So good thing all of them went down, but the control group had less. So some conclusions from all of that information, and I'm starting at specific aim number 2 because we just went over the data. So, because specific aim number 2 is to examine the effects of mindfulness on risky behaviors, including substance use and unsafe sexual behaviors. We found that cohort 1 had a significant increase in smokeless tobacco from time 1 to time 2, and then other substance use was not influenced at any time points. So we didn't find what we were looking for there, or we had the opposite finding. Specific aim 3 was to examine the effects of the mindfulness curriculum on retention. We were unable to do that due to the attendance software that was utilized that I mentioned earlier. And then specific aim 4, we went to gather data and prepare for a randomized control trial. So the baseline data was is helpful in building a case. However, our 3 time point, since we had such spotty data collection, we're not. I'll have to make a really super strong case, but but I think it's possible. I think we can do it, and I think utilizing that baseline and figuring out how to work more with the numbers. And we also had small numbers, so it's hard to pull anything out of that. So going to specific aim 1 for a final conclusion, which was to pilot the mindfulness curriculum among students, American Indian students, and determine feasibility, refine details, maximize fit in the community. So the first thing that we learned from implementing this project is classroom availability. One of the basic things. Our classroom was way across campus, in a basement actually. So our students in the health and PE class didn't have an actual classroom. It was the gymnasium. So for our students to make it from the gymnasium to our classroom was difficult, to say the least. We could add it in the gymnasium, but it's huge, it's open, it's hard. So finding a classroom that's conducive to teaching mindfulness, where it's quiet, or at least the students don't have to travel to their classroom, because you can lose students in the mix and all that stuff. So classroom availability is huge, and space anywhere is difficult at times, but making sure that you have that piece in place to implement. Second is management. So the program was managed out of the school, and a lot of our programs have difficulties inherently from different things that are going on in the school or program, for that matter. So policies and procedure difficulties, refining those policies and procedures, and then so our staff were employees of the school. And so following those school protocols, because schools have a lot of days off sometimes, especially when weather is not cooperative. And so it's difficult to even implement the curriculum that teachers have to do because of the days off. So how are we going to implement something else when there's so many days off, depending on the weather depending, or if there's a funeral in the community, a lot of schools are utilized for that. If there's anything else going on in the community, it's just a lot of times our days at school are limited. And so managing a program should be managed by someone else so that we can come in. The schools can, but if the schools are going to manage the mindfulness programs, they should know what mindfulness is. The whole school should be on board. Getting whole programs on board with some things are kind of difficult at times. But it does definitely, for a mindfulness program to be effective, and a lot of other school-based programs that require everybody to get on board, getting full buy-in from the school, from the employees, from staff, from faculty is huge, and to do an endeavor like that is kind of difficult. So it might be easier if an outside source comes in and brings in their facilitators who are trained and delivers the curriculum. It may be, may not, right? We don't know, but for our project, it would have been easier if we had people coming in who had the, and then separating the project from the school a little bit might have helped. Because if we can't sometimes implement our curriculum with students, how are we going to implement other things, other projects and programs with students? There were some conflicts of interest. Our communities are very small. Everybody knows everybody. So there are some conflicts of interest with some of the pieces of the school, people knowing each other, people being related to each other. Also, some of our facilitators are very young, so having training for them, and this goes back to the management, so having the school do training for our younger staff, anybody who comes on to it, if it's their first job, training them in the different policies and procedures and doing more thorough training. I think our organizations could do that a lot better, so that we are grooming our young employees for the tasks that they're about to undertake, and they know the consequence, the boundaries around it and the policies and procedures around conducting whatever they're doing, whether it's research or not. So there were some conflicts of interest as well. And then fourth is the facilitator mindfulness background and openness to mindfulness. So studies have shown that mindfulness facilitators should have their own practice. Being from a rural community, it's hard to get training in mindfulness unless you practice yourself and you develop that habit and you want to continue that and you have that own motivation. But there's a lot of different training programs out there, but they're also very expensive. They also take a very long time. For us and people in rural areas to go to get that training, it can be a barrier at times to doing this. So I also wanted to see with this project if we could bring in community people to train them and see if they could pick it up, and if we could deliver it kind of on a lay mindfulness facilitator basis. However, I should have listened to the research. That's what it's there for. But, you have to try it. It's a pilot, so you got to try it. Definitely would recommend next time that facilitators have a mindfulness background, continue that practice, check on that practice, facilitate that practice. We try to bring in different people to do projects. Dr. Bonnie Duran came in a couple times and did 2 days of mindfulness. So very thankful for her for that. We actually did some movie screenings at our local movie theater about mindfulness and showing what mindfulness looks like, and documentaries on mindfulness, so that our community was like, oh, okay, this is what's going on at the school, or I have an idea of it. Sometimes different mediums can help people understand what it is. So we did that. I think we showed like 2 or 3 movies at and they're an awesome theater. And then we also had an outside practitioner, Dr. Sam Himmelstein, come in. He was out of the MBA, Mind-Body Awareness group, but he also has his own practice, his own consulting business, and he came down to help our facilitators become better facilitators and gave them a lot of feedback. But as far as like doing all those things and trying to foster that mindfulness environment, your facilitators also have to be engaged in those things and go to those things, and we didn't necessarily have that. We had all these things, I thought that would help get people excited, and it got some people excited, but unfortunately our facilitators and also our school didn't, being a part of the school, to go to outside activities or weekend activities or evening activities, it's not a requirement. So having to pay extra to go to those things, pay your employees to come to a family fun night and work family fun night, those incentivizing those things I didn't necessarily do, so maybe I could do that next time if we have those trainings. But having that openness to try those new things is key to foster their own mindfulness practice. And finally, program evaluation and research. This was a research project. The research aspect was sometimes looked at as a negative thing, and it's just because of the misunderstanding of research and trying to convey that the research aspect isn't, we're not evaluating you personally, we want to make this program better. If you are delivering it, our students will have, we want to see, even if you're delivering with fidelity and we don't have results, that's not a reflection on you. So conveying why we're doing research is a part of this, because a lot of times we don't necessarily, in programs, local programs, we don't evaluate it, we just do it and hope that we have good results. But trying to convey that the research aspect is going to help not only improve the program, but help our students and help our communities, needs to be there, and that's through research capacity. Building that research capacity. I know CRCAIH has an arm of that, and they really want to do that in the communities, and I appreciate that. Because being a local researcher, a local American Indian scientist in my own community, those are some of the struggles I face. And now that I'm a part of the University of Colorado, I have that support from them, and I can go to them but developing that support in my own community is the next step, to develop that capacity so that our communities, our programs, our schools understand research. They know, they see people in our community who are doing research. So they see me, right? Like I have ties with my community, I've worked in my community. They know if they have questions, they can come to me. If I have questions for them, I can go find them. Because when you work from afar, trying to find people sometimes, email is hit or miss, phone calls sometimes are hit or miss. So just having people on the ground and building that research capacity from the ground up from those tribal communities. So putting more American Indian researchers in their communities. I think my position is one of the only positions like its kind, and I'm very blessed and thankful for that, because I don't know any other American Indian researchers who are able to live in their community and conduct research in their community and still be faculty with a major research institution. And me and my mentor, Dr. Nancy Whitesell, are trying to figure out how to make that feasible, how to make my position more feasible, and for other programs to see it as a model and say, okay, Alicia wrote for a K. She's able to write up stuff. Alicia also applied for a NARCH grant that makes her position more feasible, and it builds that connection with her community. So there's a lot more steps that we need to do to make positions like mine more feasible. But I would encourage a lot of the universities to think about that, about if you do research in American Indian communities, to think about putting American Indian researchers in your in those communities to do the research, and not just like for a week or two, but like for residents, because it does build that relationship with the community. Community knows I do research. Community knows I love research. I'll talk to them about it all the time. I'm part of the research review board, so I'm able to help the research review board review other research that comes through, given my background in my in the area of research, and to develop the research review board and develop our research capacity and continue to try to do that. But we can't do that if we don't have people on the ground, and we're not training people on the ground. So that's my big stick for universities, for research institutions, for funding agencies, is to put more American Indian researchers on the ground in American Indian communities if you want to increase research capacity and if you want to have very good research, where people are comfortable with it, people understand it, where you can have open dialogue about it, and you can reach people. You can actually reach people. I know a lot of different organizations reach people, so that can happen, but I think this is the next step, is to build that pipeline of people going into research, because then they know, because that's the reason why we go to school. It's why American Indian researchers go to school, is so we can help our communities. And the best way to help our communities is to be present mindfully, right? All a part of that, being present, peace, and being there so people can find you and talk to you and put a face with research. That can also be done through like field offices. We have a field office, and that is super helpful. People can come to our office and ask us questions, and we're continually trying to train, but it's definitely a larger effort. So, but I'm definitely very thankful and very blessed to be able to live the dream of being an American Indian researcher in my own community. So, with that, thank you guys, and do you guys have any questions? So. Yeah, Danielle.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming in and giving those results. I had a question on the curriculum.
Okay.
Does the curriculum address the role of technology in youth lives, and that's like
a good point.
impeding ability to be mindful about their surroundings if they're like dealing with their phone, the computer, the TV, all that?
Not directly. I mean, those things naturally come up, right? Like, what is pulling your attention, right? And the kids are over in the corner on their phones, right? Like, so those things naturally come up, but it's not a direct talking about those different things. But that's definitely something that pulls all of our attention, right? I just, you hear your phone go off and you respond. You're constantly checking email and constantly, you know what I mean? Or Facebook, if you get sucked into the social media world. So no, not directly, but those conversations naturally come up due to being, present. What does that mean? So those conversations.
Is that at all in the published literature on mindfulness?
Not that I'm aware of. And there's a lot of literature coming out, and by no means am I on top of all of it. But that's not something that I'm aware of, but I could look into and try to find for you. So it's a good question. Yeah.
Just kind of anecdotally, any feedback from you that you were able to do the intervention with, just from doing it, just hearing feedback from them? Did you have like discipline issues, or people were a good number really engaged with trying it? And
Yeah. So sure. She asked about anecdotal evidence of like hearing feedback from youth about whether they liked it or if there was any changes in their behavior or things like that. And yeah, students like it. I mean, once you get over the hokey part, like initially it was the hokey part for me too, right? And we all have that, like, what is this? You're making me sit in quiet? Like, seriously? But then after you do it for a while, it's like, this is nice, like to be quiet and to sit in quiet and at school, right? You don't ever get to lay down at school. Well, you're not supposed to, right? But being able, giving those students the ability to like lay down, you know, sit in some quiet. We had blankets and things like that for in our classroom. Students would come and get them. They knew when they came in, they would get comfortable. So it takes a little while, but once students get the hang of it, oh, like this is what we're doing, they enjoyed them. We had some open-ended questions, and a lot of them said, I like the quiet, the meditation piece, where the mindfulness piece, and it was 10 minutes. They would sit for 10 minutes, and it was guided meditation or guided mindfulness that came with the curriculum, and they that's one thing that they said they really enjoyed. So, I mean, if you guys ever do it, it is super nice. It's like a break in your day where you're like, oh, I can't. You regain your energy, and you're like, okay, I can do this. I can finish. Like kind of today, I needed a piece with all the back-to-back stuff. You know what I mean? That we have to do in a daily, especially at school. So, yeah.
Do you think it matters, or what time of day this class was held? Like, was it one of the things they did first thing in the morning, or right at the end of the day when they were getting ready to go home?
It depended on when they had the class, when they had health and PE. So some had it in the morning, some had it afternoon. Didn't necessarily look at when people had it and if it affected. Yeah. Obviously, there was some backlash from some students about you're taking away our PE. You know, we talked about that earlier about like the PE time, but like it was once a week. You know, and once they got the hang of it, they were like, okay. You know, a lot of them could say they could see how it could fit into the health and PE class, but not sure about the time of day and when it was most effective or not. So. Any more questions? Thank you guys for the opportunity. I appreciate it. So.